When you're out there talking to these kids, I've seen some of the stuff you post about how hard it is to ask for help.
Yeah,
And, I know you posted one recently about what it feels like when a kid comes up to you and confides and has that moment where they say what they're struggling with and you can help them.
yeah,
How do you how do you help people feel comfortable enough to understand that it's okay to ask for help?
for sure. So it's a great question. I want to break this down into two things. Number one, I want to talk about we'll first talk about why and how it's okay to ask for help, but then also too how to ask for help. Talk about to give you a little three things, some snippets of when I go and I talk to kids, really talk about who to approach, how to approach them, what to say. Some tangible things that the listeners can do if they know someone's struggling. So first, why? Why ask for help when you're struggling, right? And the biggest thing for me is, again, when I go and I talk to kids, I ask a volunteer to come out. And what I do is, I think it's a perfect example. I'll say to them, I'm going to hand you weights. And I hand them a 10-pound weight. And I say they may be struggling with something in school. I hand them another 10-pound weight. Now they're struggling with something maybe in their athletics. I hand them another 10-pound weight. And I say, now maybe you're struggling with something at home that's really got eaten you up in here. And so as the weight compounded, the 10, the 20, the 30 pounds, it got heavier and heavier, right? Because you're not doing anything with it. And you're just letting that weight over time become heavier and heavier and harder to deal with. And then over time, when you're going through those things, the longer and longer it is that you just keep them in here and you don't do something to let that weight that you're carrying out, it just builds and it builds and it comes harder and harder to actually carry and to deal with till eventually it is so tough and it's so hard to carry that you just say to yourself, I don't want to feel like this anymore, right? In the beginning, that 10-pound weight, I'll say to a student, 10 pounds, that's fine. That's nothing. Like, yeah, this is nothing. Come on. But then when it gets to the 30 to the 40 pounds that they're carrying, it's like, wow, I want to do whatever I can to get rid of this weight. And so kids are afraid, students are afraid, the athletes are afraid, nervous to ask for help. So what do? Because they don't want to feel like this anymore, right? This is so much weight, so much pressure that they're carrying around, they're dealing with. So instead of making that choice to really ask for help, they make unhealthy choices like my brother did, to drink, to smoke, to mess around with the pills. They're self-medicating, they're really numbing, they're dulling, they're masking the pain. And in the moment, it feels like this is good. Right? I don't feel that pain and that suffering anymore. But then eventually, when that feeling of being high, drunk wears off, all the emotions and feelings come back. And they realize, I'm not dealing with it. This is actually only making it worse. So
Yeah.
it's such a struggle to have the conversation because it's largely seen as I'm weak, right? I'll also talk to the students and athletes of, well, you don't want to be weak, or you don't want to be known as weak. And that's what a lot of student athletes and students think. If I ask for help, it makes me look weak. I'm not strong. I need to put my head down. I just need to be able to get through it. And that means I'm tough. That means I'm strong. I can't ask anybody for help. Anybody.
Yeah.
But I let them know that there are athletes out there who are making millions, and they struggle with the same stuff you do. And so it's important that they realize I always say this, everybody in life struggles. Everybody. I don't care who you are, how much money you've made, where you live, what job you have, if you're an athlete, what sports you play, everybody struggles because it's a part of life, right?
Yeah.
And so when you get through these tough moments, you're able to become stronger for life and you're able to actually get through the moments that you're going to face later in life, right?
Amen.
So that's just, but to talk about that, I want to talk about the hurdle for a second. Then we can go into the tangible things about how they can ask for help because it's a humongous hurdle to ask for help because there is so much fear, there's so much concern, there's so much fright about asking for help. And I'm going to call out for a sec the parents who are listening because a big reason why, and I hear this all the time. I hear this all the time. Students, athletes will come up to me after and say, I want to say something, but I'm just so nervous. I'm afraid, I'm concerned. Is my mother going to yell at me? Is my father going to yell at me? Are they going to reprimand me? Am I going to get in trouble? Like, what's going to happen? And so we as parents have not, I'm not going to say everybody, but some parents have not created a safe space for their kids, for their daughter, for their son to feel comfortable to approach them and ask for help. And so that is a large reason why we see students, athletes, self-medicating, because they're like, I don't want to feel like this, but I can't approach my parents because I'm afraid, I'm nervous of what they're going to say, what they're going to think, how they're going to react. So I now have to take this into my own hands. And this is how I think I'm going to be able to get through this tough moment, right? Another thing too is there's so much unknown. I talk about approaching a trusted adult, which we'll get into in a sec. And the students, the athletes will think, well, if I approach my coach, what are they going to think, right? What are they going to say? So it's really important as adults, we create a healthy environment for our kids, to ask for help from.
Yeah, that I could not agree with you more. And to echo the sentiment, I've realized, having raised my four, my youngest is 16 now. What I have learned in the last few years is, as much as we celebrate scholarships and championships and grades and all of that stuff that the world wants to tell you is amazing, and in those moments, those things can feel amazing, but the gold and the bond that you build with your kids is built in those lower moments, lower vibrational moments where they're scared, where maybe they've messed something up, because that's human and that's part of the growing up process. If they can come to you, and when they come to you, that's when, yes, there's a lot of the work is put in, but it's when the bond is built. So that's something that I've learned as a parent, and that I really want. In the last few months, I've been thinking how much I want to get that out there, is like not to fear those moments.
Yeah. Well, I'd love to hop on another time and we can dive more into talking about this, but through the parents' eye view. Because when I talk to parents also, and I have a lot I can say on that for sure. But I love to give this analogy, and then we'll move on to the tangible things. Yeah. And that is, when you're lifting weights, when you lift a heavy, heavy bench press, nobody lifts it alone, because that weight can just become so heavy and you can't get it up. And so you need someone there to spot you to get it up. And so I look at, when you're struggling like that, you can't lift this weight on your own. You may be able to get it up halfway. You may be able to get it up 3/4 of the way. But to get it up all the way, you need somebody there to help you, just like you need that spotter. So that's important to keep in mind.
Great analogy.
Yeah. So moving on to, the tangible things. So how do I ask for help? This is great. Okay, I know I need to ask for help. What do I do? And so for me, the big things are, number one, who? A trusted adult, right? Who should I approach when I have this conversation? And it's an adult you can trust. This can be your parents. But again, talking about parents and approaching them with this conversation, that comes with a little bit more nerves, a little bit more concern, fright than somebody else, because we think it's my mother, it's my father. Or if you don't live with your parents, it's your grandparents, whoever that person is, your guardian. It comes with a little more fear and nerves, because you say to yourself, I'm a little bit more embarrassed. I feel like I let them down. They've done so much for me. They've helped me. And I feel like me going to them and letting them know I'm making these choices. So it's hard to do that. So it doesn't have to be your parents. It can be somebody at school, whether it's a counselor, whether it's a teacher. It can be a sport coach. It can be a friend's parents, an aunt and uncle. But I always say, it's important. The biggest thing is the person you approach is an adult you can trust. Somebody you have a trust level with. But it's also important we understand it's never going to be 100% comfortable to have this conversation, no matter how much you trust that person. There's always going to be the feeling and emotions of fear and nerves, along with concern about what's going to happen, right? So then I say, it makes it a little easier or stronger in numbers when you approach a friend, a teammate, somebody who can be by your side when you have this conversation, to make it a little easier, to take some of that weight that you're carrying off, and they carry it for you now, right?
Yeah.
So That's number one. Who? A trusted adult with somebody by your side who can help you with the conversation.
I love that distinction of having a peer who understands from your worldview, and then that trusted adult that you might not know has probably been through at least
Right.
something similar, but you don't think about that when you're on the the student level. But
For sure.
that's a really good point.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
that a
And
lot.
again, I mean, adults, again, we won't get too much into it here, but as I said, I'd love to come on, but all adults have gone through tough moments because everybody does, as I said, right? So,
Right. Yeah.
all right. So now that we know who to approach, how do we approach them, right? How do we
Right.
start the conversation? Because this is probably the most nerve-wracking thing out of all. Your heart is racing, but you have to do it. And so I would say there's so many ways to start the conversation. You can talk to that trusted adult face to face, but a lot of people just will say to me, that's too much. I can't do that. Not at the beginning, not initially. Okay, well, you have the person's email. You can write them an email. You're friends with them on social media. Again, we go back to great things about social media, right? There you go. You're friends with them on social media. You can write them a DM, a message. If they're a counselor, if they're a teacher at your school, you can write them a letter. You can slip it under their door. You have their phone number. You can call. You can text them, right? So there's all of these ways that you can actually originally start to approach them, to contact them, to have the conversation in these ways. And then the third thing is, now that we know who to approach and you've picked a way to approach them, what do you say when you approach them face to face? What do you say in the DM, in the email, in that letter? And I just let the students know it's important. You're not writing paragraphs and paragraphs and paragraphs. You're just simply writing a sentence or two in that email, in that text, that DM of, I'm really struggling. I am really going through a tough moment right now. I need help.